When you're wandering up and down the supermarket aisles, it is time-consuming and often impossible to find healthy options that don't contain additives, inflammatory vegetable oils, loads of sugar and other processed ingredients. And that's why I'm excited to share that we are partnering with Part and Parcel, an online store where you can find all of your healthy pantry staples in one place. Head on over to partandparcel.com.au/Natural Super Kids and use the coupon code NSK for Natural Super Kids, $20, that's NSK $20 to get $20 off your first order. I personally love to stock up on healthy baking ingredients, spelt coconut and buckwheat flours, rapadura sugar and maple syrup. They have an amazing range of healthy sauces and condiments. Some of my favorites are the Sears Organic Basil Pesto and the Good Fat Mayo, both made with only olive oil, none of those inflammatory vegetable oils. I always stock up on cans of black beans and chickpeas, lentils, butter beans to add plant fibre to my family meals, and they have a great range of sustainable and healthy tinned fish options as well. I'm always adding crackers and wraps to my order. They stock mountain bread wraps, which I love, rice crackers, seed crackers, again, all without the additives and inflammatory vegetable oils. I love the tea and coffee range. The made loose leaf teas are delicious, as well as the Tulsi tea range. I particularly love the tummy tea after meals. You can find lots of gut health ingredients at Part and Parcel. They stock the Gevity broth pastes and the Nutra organic broth powders, which I always have on hand in my pantry. They also stock things like supplements, cod liver oil, collagen, and whole food powders such as Foraged for You. They have a great range of low-tox cleaning products as well. Some of my favourite brands are stocked at Part and Parcel, Koala Eco and Abode. And they also have personal care products, Weleda skincare, which I love, low-tox sunscreens, deodorants, and so much more. So head on over to partandparcel.com.au/Natural Super Kids and use the coupon code NSK $20 to get $20 off your first order. Orders must be over $99 to claim this $20 discount. I hope you love Part and Parcel just as much as I do. Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast. Jessica Donovan here. I hope you are well. I have some special guests on the podcast today. I haven't done podcasts like this for a little while. This is a conversation podcast with some parents who have been part of the Natural Super Kids Club for a little while now. And I connected with them a few weeks ago when they interviewed me for their business venture, which is called the Parents Directory. So this conversation is all about their journey with mainly their son, Matthew, but also we talk a little bit about their daughter, Brianna, as well. I just love how proactive, how educated, how invested Anne and Ben are in their family's health. And it really is reflective in this conversation. So you'll hear in this podcast that Matthew has had a whole range of issues, with developmental delays, with neurodevelopmental issues, with some physical sort of issues as well related to his digestion and his immunity. There's so much, and they just talk about their story really well in this podcast. So I'm excited to share because I think it's going to give a lot of families hope that might be in the thick of what feels like a lot of things that they're dealing with, and how Anne and Ben, got the support they needed, got clarity. And I think it's a story that really highlights the importance of having a team on board, and really, zooming out and looking at health holistically. And they really are perfect examples of parents that, didn't take everything's okay, or there's nothing too much to worry about here, or the walls that they came across in terms of, getting nowhere when it came to answers and solutions for their child's health. So I am, really excited to share this conversation with you. And I urge you to go and check out the Parents Directory, because they're doing some amazing work over there as well. We'll pop all the links to the Parents Directory in the show notes. So definitely go on and check it out. Hello, Anne and Ben. Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast.
Thanks. Yes. Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
I'm so excited to dive into this conversation with you. So let's start, rewind and start, a few years ago. Tell us about the health challenges that you were having with Matthew specifically first.
Yeah, so our challenges with Matthew really started when he was a baby. So he started off pretty early with breastfeeding challenges. So he would take a long time to feed, and he was very sluggish and we'd be falling asleep, and we had lots of issues with latch and needing to do lots of top-up feeds in the early weeks and things like that. So it was very, very difficult. We also had a lot of issues from probably 2 to 3 weeks old with colic and lots of unsettledness and crying. Reflux as well. We had very sort of persistent unsettled behaviour in his first year, and that was day and night time. So that was quite challenging. We had some delayed developmental milestones, and he seemed much slower reaching some of those physical milestones than some of his peers. He had a lot of sleep and settling challenges, particularly during the daytime, from around 5 months of age. In the early days, though, it was more overnight challenges. He was very sensitive and easily overstimulated by his environment. And we also found out later down the track, not in the early years, but that he actually had some retained primitive reflexes too. So that was some of his kind of early life and first year challenges. But then as he moved into being a toddler and preschool years, we continued to see that some of the challenges that he had experienced as a baby sort of morphed into different challenges, but kind of related challenges. So he was still having some issues with behaviour, but the behaviours now were around big emotional outbursts and physical aggression, and trouble with emotional regulation and understanding his emotions and being able to express those to us. He had speech delays, so he had a lot of frustration around trouble with communicating to us. Physically, he was displaying things like having frequent falls and clumsiness and incoordination and things like that. And we kind of saw an increase in the intensity and frequency and the duration of some of the behavioural challenges as well. So instead of, as we had kind of been encouraged that those things would get better over time, they were actually kind of getting a little bit worse and weren't sort of progressing as we'd been expected. So there were probably a few other things as well that we had noticed, that he was, especially once he started kinder, he was getting sick quite a lot, and those sicknesses would start to last longer each time that he got sick. He was having more trouble getting over them. And so he was missing a lot of kinder and participation in social activities and things like that. And that then also played into, I think, some of his challenges with socialisation and that too. Digestively, he started to display, I guess, what we would say, like just some sort of loose bowel motions, or sometimes a bit unformed or a bit mushy. And sometimes we'd see some food in there. And I know that's maybe getting a little bit graphic, but that was some of what we were noticing. And we were getting a bit concerned because we were thinking, oh, how is he going? Is he digesting his food properly? What's going on? It was all a little bit new and different. And he hadn't always been like that. And then even things like, I guess we were suspecting that maybe he was a little bit tired because he continued to need daytime naps until he was about age 5. And he would often wake from sleep in the morning or after a daytime nap quite agitated or frustrated, and it didn't seem like he'd had refreshing sleep. So he'd also had some challenges with skin issues, and there were just quite a number of things that really we were just unsure as to what was going on. There were lots of little things, and when we'd raised some of these concerns with our care providers, we hadn't really got much back. A lot of it had kind of been dismissed as sort of on the spectrum of normal, or every child develops a bit differently, and that's probably nothing to worry about. But our gut was telling us that maybe there's something else going on here.
And I mean, as you could see from that list, it was quite overwhelming for us going through all of that, just because it was just one thing after another, and on top of other health challenges that we had in the family and that kind of thing. It really was just felt insurmountable in many ways. So
I can imagine. And like you just succinctly listed, all of those things obviously on reflection, but when you were going through that would have just felt so confusing and overwhelming. And is Matthew your eldest?
He is, yeah.
Yeah. So you're a new parent. So there's that whole like what's normal and what's not. And, we all hear those newborn days are tricky, and, it's really hard to decipher, what's normal and what's not, and when to seek support. So that sounds very stressful. And I imagine for you both, there was, sleep deprivation and all of the overwhelm, and then normal life happening alongside of all of that. So that sounds a lot.
And we had 2 years apart between Matthew and Brianna. Brianna's our younger one. And so when she came along, obviously Matthew is still in the middle of this. And so we still had all of these challenges going on with Matthew. And then we brought the newborn into the mix. So now we had all of everything going on with her. And her ride wasn't exactly smooth either. I mean, she had different issues, but, we had constipation with her from a couple of months. We had, food sensitivities to her and other skin stuff as well. She also had delays with achieving a lot of her physical milestones, eczema as well, and just, again, similar challenges with her coordination and falls and all that. So, while there were differences between them and not everything was exactly the same, we still felt like we had plenty of challenges with her as well. So.
Yeah. And that just kind of, exacerbates everything, doesn't it, when you're dealing with two? I mean, mine are 2 years apart as well. And I just know those early days of having a 2-year-old and a newborn are tricky enough, even without all of the health challenges. So I'm surprised you two are still standing.
But yes, you're right. The overwhelm was real. And we did feel quite sort of alone and unsupported through a lot of that because, as I said, we had been trying to seek some supports and had just continued to be reassured that a lot of it was kind of in that spectrum of normal. So just to keep sort of pushing on, and often as you do feel like, those early years can be just challenging. And so you kind of accept, maybe this is just how it is. But we now know that, that wasn't the case.
Yes, and that can make things even more confusing when you're feeling like something really isn't right here, but you're being told that this is within kind of the realm of normal. So before you found Natural Super Kids, what had you already tried? I mean, I know you said you were sort of coming against, advice that things were sort of okay, but had you tried many sort of other modalities or seen specialists, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I'd been on a bit of a health journey myself, recovering after having my second child. And so I had heard a little bit about how reducing harmful chemicals in food and food additives and things like that, and how certain people can be sensitive to particular things in foods. So we'd kind of gone down that rabbit hole a little bit initially, thinking, maybe this might be part of our children's concerns, that they may be sensitive to certain food chemicals or additives in food. So we'd gone on a very restrictive diet where we cut out things for a while there, but didn't really see the changes, particularly around behaviour and even some of the other digestive symptoms that we were hoping for. So that was a bit frustrating and a bit of a letdown. And we really were hoping that was going to be the magic bullet, as you always do, to find that one thing, but it wasn't. And so then we really just had to keep sort of looking and seeking. And I think that was a lot of our journey in those early years, is we didn't stop, and I refused to kind of stop looking for answers because I knew deep down that something wasn't right, and I knew we did just have to persist.
Yeah. And so then what made you sort of turn to naturopathy and try that naturopathic approach?
Yeah, so I think, we came across Natural Super Kids and the naturopathic approach really through just an online webinar that was advertised about mood and behaviour and sleep. And I thought, well, this is interesting. It sounds quite relevant to us at the moment, some of the challenges we've been experiencing for a while. So I signed up for the webinar and learned a whole lot in that session, and then was very eager and keen to learn more about the approach. And I realised as well how much I didn't know about diet and nutrition, and was able to reflect on, gosh, there's a lot that's changed in this space since I learned at high school about this stuff. And so, yes, and even just hearing about the microbiome, I think that was a very new concept to me at the time. And so, yes, I was just so keen to learn more. And so initially, yes, we joined the Natural Super Kids Club and learnt a bit through that, and learnt lots through that, actually. But I think once we kind of had a bit of a general sort of overview of what we kind of needed to know in that space about diet, nutrition and supplementation, we were able to put a bit of that into practice and then go, okay, I think we need a bit more one-on-one individualised support. And that's when we I guess, engaged with one of the naturopaths at Natural Super Kids. So, yeah, we found that really helpful. But having the background, I think, of the information in the club was really helpful, because we had that kind of nice base to start with when we started that one-on-one support.
Yeah, I love that you say that, because it's one of the reasons I sort of launched and created the Natural Super Kids Club, because even though we have a lot more time with clients than, say, a GP does as naturopaths, there's still only so much you can get through in a one-on-one consultation. And really, that's what the Natural Super Kids Club is about. It's about that, that broader education and deeper education and having access to the resources. So on the microbiome, you did a microbiome test for Matthew as well. So what was it like getting those results? And, I guess what were the sorts of things that came up? What was it like to see what was actually going on inside his gut?
Oh, look, I think it was great to actually get some data, because there's so much sometimes when you're wondering what's happening and, you know something's not quite right. But actually having the results come through and being able to go, oh, okay, we can see there's some imbalances there, and that kind of thing meant it just felt like we could actually act on it, and it felt like it was something measurable and specific rather than just a lot of hoping. Because and even previously with the dietary approach, it was all very much just hope. Okay, we'll try these and we'll try isolating things and doing different things. But actually having some test results with some hard data, I think it was kind of like, oh, okay, there's actually something here and we can actually do something about it. So
I think, we got that test done fairly early in the piece in terms of our one-on-one support with the naturopath. And so we were just able to refine a lot of the dietary advice and the supplementation advice so that it could be a whole lot more effective. It wasn't that any of it was incorrect or wrong as such. It was just that it really helped us refine, I think, the approach that we were taking to be really so much more individualized and specific. And so some of the things that we really were able to change that were fairly simple changes were just the probiotic, for example. So we were able to identify the particular strains that we really needed to be focusing on for our son. And another thing was just around, we discovered that we needed to be supporting butyrate levels. And so we were able to include more of those gut nourishing foods in the diet. And also, I think adding in some supplements was what we did at the time as well, just for a short-term support in that area until things settled down and stabilised a bit.
Yeah, I love that, because I think microbiome testing, it's definitely not the be all and end all. We get a lot of, questions and people reaching out, about microbiome testing, and it's a piece of the picture within, like, looking at the full kind of health picture of a child. But like you said, it can really help to refine what's going to be helpful based on, those personalized results that come back. So it can be really helpful for some kids. So I just love how proactive you both are as parents. And I know you made so many changes across so many areas, food, products, home environment. If you had to choose, just 2 or 3 things that made the biggest difference for your family, what do you think they would be?
Yeah, so I think the 2 things that we really narrowed it down to was diet changes. And that was something that we were really easily able to test, because by doing things like taking gluten and dairy out of the diet, we were easily able to then reintroduce those things and see if it made a difference. And in our children's case, it does. It does seem to make a difference at the moment for them. They do seem to have a bit of a sensitivity to those things. So that's been a big one for us. Also, following a low GI diet and minimal additive diet as well has been really helpful. A lot of their symptoms are worse when they're consuming those foods. And I guess the other side of it too was just around, we were really hoping to try to reduce some of those digestive symptoms, but there was also a big focus for our children on reducing neuroinflammation, because we knew that they did have some things like retained primitive reflexes and brain imbalance and things like that. So we knew that gut-brain connection was important to support. And so some of those inflammatory foods, they were an obvious kind of go-to to see if that was helping, and it was helping support them. And also with the blood sugar balancing and supporting energy stability as well, particularly with our son's sort of fatigue that he was showing and needing for more rest. I think once we started supporting some of that, we did see some signs of improvement in those areas.
Yeah, I love those tips. And with the whole gluten dairy thing, I think a lot of people are like, oh, no, cutting out gluten and dairy, that feels so hard, especially when kids are fussy or picky and it feels like that's really all they eat is gluten and dairy. How did you find the process of cutting out those, I guess, groups of food?
It was initially challenging, particularly because some of those foods were some of their favourite foods. They both love cheese, and they really both enjoyed bread. I think we all enjoyed that. And so, just needing to find those swaps. And that's been just a process of doing that over time. But I think the resources that we had access to within the club, but also through our naturopath and our one-on-one appointments, it made it really simple to do that. So we had some really great advice. So now we have a really good recipe where we make our own bread, and that makes it really simple. But even just doing other things and having alternatives, I think it just made it so much easier to make those changes. So it wasn't like having to cut foods out. It was just, okay, this is the new way that we have this.
Yes, I love that, because there is so much on offer now in terms of gluten and dairy-free options, isn't there? What were you going to say something as well, Ben?
Look, I think there was a part of the challenge too, is that we did have to start preparing a lot of the food ourselves. And so there is a bit more work in that. Sometimes I have to line up a big cooking day and actually go through and do stuff, and also just learning what the gluten dairy free alternatives are that we can utilize. So, there was a bit of, trying to, I guess, work out what works for our menu, and what they're going to be happy eating and that kind of thing, that still give us, like some vegan cheese alternatives and, gluten-free breads and that kind of thing, and finding what's going to work for us and what's not going to take up too much time, or, because even some of the stuff available is kind of tricky. So it's been a challenge because we don't have access to as many of the convenience foods as maybe what we like. So we just have to plan ahead. We got to do the big cook-ups. We have to make sure there's room in the freezer and that, just to help mitigate some of those other challenges when you can't just buy it off the shelf.
So. Yeah.
I think it's made us all healthier. We're making these changes. So,
well, like you said, if you can't have the convenience foods, then you just naturally have more homemade foods, don't you? So then that cuts out, vegetable oils and additives that you might have, been consuming more of before as well. But yes, more work, and I think it's a bigger job, I guess. But I love that you said about, the cooking days and finding what works for your family, and also what you said about, some of the convenience options that are gluten and dairy free aren't great out there either. So you do need to watch that. I think some people think just because it says gluten free, it must be healthy, but that is definitely not the case. I'm sure you've seen that.
Look, especially even when you bring in something like aiming for low GI, and so sometimes when you've got gluten free, it's still high GI and that kind of thing. So, I guess really understanding what we've had to do as a family and what's needed, and tailor it from there has been part of it. So, so I think definitely the diet stuff has been huge. And then I think the other side of things for us was really focusing on the nervous system and some of the brain-based therapies have also worked in really well with that. We've seen a lot of great results with that as well. So, we commenced doing neurologically focused chiropractic care across the family, and we've seen a lot of great result with that. But also, therapies to integrate the retained primitive reflexes, because both our kids had them, and we saw a lot of changes come through as those primitive reflexes got integrated. We know it's not that way for everyone, but for our kids, it was really playing a big impact. And so just really trying to support that nervous system rebalancing and getting them into that, not in fight, flight all the time, always being on edge. So, things that we did in relation to that also made a big difference.
Yeah, because I think, like I touched on before, with the gut-brain and the brain-gut connection, that bidirectional connection that we learnt about, it's just been a really key factor, I think, in, one thing on its own probably wasn't going to be the thing that solved the root issues, but together and the combination of a couple of different things has really sort of given us the result that we've been looking for. And I think, just to touch on from before as well on the diet, one thing I didn't mention was just around supplements, and that's been a really important part of our care as well. I think through the naturopathic approach, we previously did have some kids on our children on some supplements. However, they were just ones that we could source locally. And I think we've really learnt the importance of being able to access some of the practitioner brands that really do have optimal dosing. And I think that's really made it more effective in terms of what we're able to give our kids to support them, not just for their sort of general health and well-being, but also during periods of sickness. And having those go-to things that we can have in the pantry ready to go for those times has really optimised how we can care for them.
Yes, I love that you mentioned that, because it makes such a difference, doesn't it? Getting onto the right supplements, but also, those high quality supplements do make a big difference. And I also want to just go back to what you were saying about, bringing in different therapies, because I think you have just done so well at this as a family. I know off air you were mentioning that, you sort of got introduced to some of these therapies by being in the club and different interviews that you were watching and things that we were talking about in there. But also you've talked about the retained primitive reflexes a few times. So do you want to explain a little bit about that to people who might be listening that are like, what is that?
I guess it's something that, people could look into a little bit more if they're interested in it. There is lots of information out there now about it. But I guess basically these retained primitive reflexes, the primitive reflexes are something that babies are, they're born with, and they help them with the actual birthing process, but they also help them with movement and activities that they need to do, functions that they need to do early in life, things such as breastfeeding, and then other movements that they might need to do, and initiating other activities such as crawling and walking. All of these things neurologically have a bit of a sequence and a process that kind of needs to be followed. And sometimes if there's interference with that natural development and the progression and the integration of these reflexes, so that kind of going away of those reflexes as such, it can impact on future and further development. And one thing that we particularly sort of learned a bit about in that space was how that also can then impact on brain development and immaturity, which can then have that bidirectional impact on gut health and function, and immaturity of sealing up some of those kind of leaky gut that you can often see in young kids and babies, which is normal. But if that doesn't mature as it's kind of, I guess, intended to, as nature intends it to at the right time, then some of these, I guess, food sensitivities and things like that can be kind of popping up as a bit of a symptom sometimes. And I know that's obviously only one example of a reason for a food sensitivity, but in our case, that was potentially one of the contributing factors, and that we have seen improvements in our children's ability to tolerate certain things as we've been integrating those. Hopefully that answers the question.
You explained that so well. Definitely. And I just wanted people to get a feel for, yes, talking about naturopathy and nutrition and, low tox even. I know you've implemented a lot in that space as well. But there are all these other therapies that, you've brought in that have really supported your family as well. So, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So do you want to walk me through some of the positive changes that you've seen in Matthew and Brianna?
Well, fortunately, there's actually quite a long list of this as well. We have seen some real positive change. So, I think even just for Matthew, one of the big things off the bat was his improved frustration tolerance. Because if we did one thing wrong according to his expectation, then there could be a major meltdown. And as we started to kind of work through the holistic approach, we saw things not matter so much to him. So certain things like turning on the blender in the morning, like if any of us turned the blender on and it wasn't him, the whole neighborhood would know about it. Whereas, it got to a point where he's like, no, you can do it today, Dad, or you can do it today, Mum. Like he was more flexible. There was more of that tolerance coming in. There was reduced physical aggression. We started to see more social skills come out. Like he was using terminology around feelings and emotions that he'd never used before. So he was actually starting to describe what he was going through rather than not having words for it. So we saw improved sensory awareness and just both externally, but also with his interoception. So, a whole lot around that just starting to come together. And even things like reading skills, where he was able to, even memorize books from a young age, but all of a sudden he started to actually be able to put words together and bring comprehension and things like that. So,
yeah. There was other things like his coordination and physical abilities improved significantly, physical strength. He had better problem-solving skills. He was able to co-regulate with us, and that was something that was somewhat absent for a lot of the early years, which was quite distressing, I think, both ways, really. So that was great when that was actually able to come online. Yes, we had a lot less hyperactivity. There was a lot more calm and being able to access a regulated state, much less anxiety. He was sleeping better and waking more rested and in a better frame of mind. His ability to communicate both verbally and non-verbal communication skills improved. He had less frequent and severe illnesses when he did get sick. So that was impacting less on his participation in just daily life and function. And he had just other things that were emerging too, like we didn't realise that he didn't have a very good sense of smell, and all of a sudden he was commenting on things that he was smelling and all of that. His posture improved, even just his oral muscle function improved as well. So there was just a very long list of things that, huge improvements. And we probably, if we hadn't have kind of had to sort of list all of those things, we probably wouldn't have realised how much we were actually struggling with and how many challenges we had, until we now look at and reflect on it and go, yes, there was a lot, but so much has changed, so much has improved, which is great.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's just so powerful to reflect, isn't it? Because you do forget about a lot of the things that you were struggling with. And when I hear you sort of list all those things, I just think, how much more ease and joy and connection there must be, within the family, and obviously, his well-being. But we know when a child has all of this stuff going on, that like really affects the well-being of the entire family, doesn't it? So I just this huge sense of relief for your family that you've seen those improvements.
Oh, absolutely. And I think for all of us too, because he was obviously struggling. It's not easy to be in that place where you're always being set off and struggling with dysregulation. So, it wasn't, we can look at it and kind of go, we knew we were struggling and we knew we were, not knowing what to do and all of that. But he was struggling even more than we were. And so seeing him thrive more and be in that more restful state and be more at peace and able to engage, it's means so much as parents. So,
and I like to describe it by saying, some of the supports and therapies that we've been able to access in the last couple of years have really just unlocked his potential. We've now just been able to see, the beautiful individual that he is, and really just seeing him, blossoming and shining, and not being held back unnecessarily by some of these things.
Yeah. And I just want to say kudos to you both for being such proactive parents as well. And really, pushing and seeking all the information and the support that has, helped him get to where he is today. Because, that journey has been a rough one from what you're talking about. So I just want to give you both credit for all the amazing work you've done for him. And I know everyone's had, good positive health benefits in your family as well.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Yeah, no, it means a lot. And yeah, it's just the reward is just in the results and just seeing him thriving now. Yeah.
Of course. So if a parent is listening right now, which I'm sure there are parents listening right now who, are back where you were, struggling with some of those same things that you were, what would you say to them?
I think the first thing that I would say is keep seeking someone out until you find someone that will actually listen to you and take your concerns seriously. It did take us a while to sort of find some of these people that became part of our care team, but just keep seeking that and that holistic support as well. Like I think I mentioned earlier, it's often not just one individual or therapy. It can you often require a combination. So I think from our experience from a diet and nutrition perspective, like the resources that we've been able to access through the Natural Super Kids Club and then one-on-one through the naturopathic support have been just very life-changing, really. Like they've been very transformative. We've learnt so much. We have so much more confidence now in navigating health concerns and challenges. Like I mentioned before, when the kids get sick, we have a go-to plan. We have things to support them. So that's just been such a relief and such a weight off us, and not sort of that uncertainty and unknowing around what to do and how to support them best. I think also just encouraging people to keep learning about different aspects of their children's health and well-being, because I think the more that you know, the more that you can help put those pieces of the puzzle together. And also you can find other providers and practitioners that might be able to help you on that journey as well, because sometimes trying to figure it all out for yourself is really difficult. And, we can't be specialists in all these different fields of child health and development. So we do need to often engage those supports. But just initially then understanding, well, who might I need to seek support from is the first point. So having that awareness, I think, is key. And really trusting your instincts. So I think, listening to that gut feeling when you're feeling like something's off, something's not right, the advice that you're receiving maybe just doesn't feel right, seeking those second opinions or just keep searching for something. I think that's kind of what got us there eventually to finding sort of the things that we needed to find. And
look, I think, when we were in the middle of it, we were reading books, doing courses, talking to people, and you would hear a lot of, amazing testimonials, whether it's from a book or something like that, and people talking about the life-changing results that this book gave them or that this course gave them, and really for us, that was almost a bit of a letdown, because we would get that book and we would read it and we'd try and put it into practice and we wouldn't see the change. And we kept feeling like we were one of the ones that it just didn't work for. And at the end of the day, the biggest results we saw didn't come from any one thing. It actually came from combining a whole lot of things together. And so it sometimes it can be a really rough emotional journey as a parent when you put all your hope into this one thing and all your hope into this, and then you don't get the result that the testimonial said you were going to get, and then you feel deflated and like there's something wrong with your family or this. And I guess for us now, taking that step back and going, you know what, it probably hasn't been any one thing. There's been a few key things that have played a really big approach, especially the whole diet side. But it's actually been a combination of a whole lot of things, and putting it all together, that's really helped. And so finding those practitioners and those modalities that are holistic and that do work in that whole bigger picture has really made a big difference. And so I think, when talking to parents where we were, I think having that approach helps, because it helps you emotionally, because you're not putting your hope in one thing and having that roller coaster ride. But it also just keeps you looking sideways and going, okay, what else, what are the different pieces of the puzzle that we need to work on? Okay, we got this bit's going well now. We might have diet, and what do we need to look at for other supports and socially and emotionally and all that kind of thing. So I think just keeping that holistic, bigger picture view, really will help. So.
Yeah. And I think that really highlights, what holistic health really is all about. It's not about just one thing. It's, looking at the picture. And I think like when you're talking about those testimonials, they're not often telling the whole picture. Yes, they might have got this result, but it's from what they've done from this book and all the other things that they've been doing. So yeah, I think that's a really important point. Thank you for sharing that. So this, I guess your journey and your story has led to you guys creating the Parents Directory. So can you tell us, our listeners, a bit more about that? Because I'm sure there are plenty of people who are listening that would be really interested in what you do at the Parents Directory.
Yeah, so I guess Parents Directory was just something that was really born out of a lot of the challenges that we experienced in our journey. And it was something that we really wanted to create to help support parents in those early years, but really from preconception, pregnancy, moving into their birth and postpartum, and then early childhood, so that they felt really supported along that journey. They knew how they could be proactive and preparing for some of the things that were coming. But also, if they find themselves already in early parenting and unsure as to how to navigate some of the challenges like we did, then where could they go to find really good, trusted, reliable resources? And so that's ultimately why we created Parents Directory. We really wanted to help people learn about some of the things that often aren't covered in those birth preparation classes that you attend when you're pregnant with your first baby. Some of those things like the emotional shifts, the relational challenges, the overwhelm of just not knowing what you don't know. And so really we wanted to create something where we could help guide people through what to expect and some of the things that they might need to learn about and know a little bit more about as they're going through the process. And so, I guess we really wanted to try to help reduce that overwhelm, that uncertainty about, where do we go to find good, reliable resources. We didn't want people to be struggling unnecessarily or feeling alone like we did often in some of those early days. And really to hopefully try and avoid some of the challenges that we experienced, or if they are experiencing them, try to get on top of them quicker and just feel like there's a place that they can go, because we know that care providers and routine appointments, they're very short time slots that you get given. There's not a lot of time for questions. They can be very just restricted in the scope that they may have lots of information that they'd like to share with you, but they just don't have the time to be able to do that. And sometimes the systems that they're working in restrict them from what they can share with you as well. And so, I guess sometimes we need to find other ways to resource ourselves and educate ourselves. And that was a big part of why we've created some of what we've created with the directory.
Yes, such an amazing resource. But
I guess the other side of it too is just really, when we started going into parenting, we were looking for, I guess what people could tell us and what we could learn and that kind of thing. And we just didn't get a lot from, I guess, the more traditional birth courses and that kind of thing that was there. And so really trying to help take people almost like a coach perspective, take their hand and just walk them through some of these other areas that we never learnt about, things like the relational changes, things, like some of the other, just some of the other stuff that you encounter that you never think you're going to encounter going in. But parents listening to it, you know the things that shell shock you along the way. You know the things that just take you by surprise. And often the things that hit you hardest are the things that they don't talk about in, I guess, the more traditional, preparing for parenting paths. And so we just want to help people not feel alone in that and not feel like they're the only ones struggling with this, and go, okay, you're not alone in it. And you know what, there are people who can help you. And so we're really trying to connect a lot of parents with those other people through, a variety of ways, because, we have directories, we have courses, all that kind of thing, communities, just to help get people plugged in and connected.
Yeah. So where do people go to find out more if they're feeling like this sounds like something I really want to explore?
Yeah. So our website, so www.parentsdirectory.com.au. And yes, we have all of the information there. If you sign up to our mailing list, you'll be able to get access to lots of our freebies and other resources as well. We also have blog posts that we post, and we have a social media account as well. So we're on Facebook and Instagram, so you can find us there. But yes, basically just come over to our website. Everything's there. The links to everything are there. So that's probably the best place to go.
Beautiful. And we'll make sure all of those links are in the show notes, so they are easy to find for everyone. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your family's story. It's been really great for me to hear this. I don't practice anymore. And, with running the Natural Super Kids Club, definitely I'm a big part of the community, but I don't always hear, the in-depth stories of how, the club and our services have helped families. So it's been a pleasure to listen to your story. Thanks so much for joining me.
No worries. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Jess. And yes, we do just want to take the opportunity to thank you personally for, how you've helped our family, and thank you for the services that you provide, because they are really beneficial, and we hope other families can really find benefit in them too, which we're sure they will.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week. Don't forget, you can get $20 off your first order with Part and Parcel, an online store where you can find all of your healthy pantry staples in one place. All you need to do is use the coupon code NSK for Natural Super Kids, $20, that's NSK, $20 to get $20 off your first order, as long as it's over $99. And as well as all of those healthy pantry staples that I mentioned at the start of this episode, they have a great range of snack foods, maybe for those weeks where you don't get around to baking whole food bars, healthy popcorn, jerky, and baking mixes with only healthy ingredients. Head on over to partandparcel.com.au/Natural Super Kids and use the coupon code NSK $20. I know you will love the convenience and all of the healthy options that Part and Parcel have to offer. We are thrilled to be collaborating with them.